Tonight we've got Michael Baker, who's the regional coach lead in the Midlands. Michael's based out of Loughborough. He's going to be talking us through peaking for championships.
Thanks for the introduction, Graham. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. I'm the unfortunate so-and-so who's got the short straw of having to do the last webinar for England Athletics before people get their hair cut. So apologies for the barnet. For those who see me in a week's time, it'll look much smarter, I assure you. Hope everyone's doing well on this Wednesday evening, and I hope the return back to your tracks and your groups has been a fruitful one, and one that hasn't kind of posed too many issues for you. It's a big pleasure for me to do my second webinar now with England Athletics. So the first one I did back in November time was around resisted sprinting. This one's very different. So for those who watched the one in November, I was off my seat, I was doing some demos when questions were coming in and this, that and the other. Tonight won't be so dynamic, but hopefully will provide some thought-provoking ideas and some use for you guys moving forward when it comes to getting ready for championships. So in terms of tonight's webinar is about getting ready for a championships. And for me, I've kept our aims really simple for today. Just two aims, and we're going to discuss the underpinnings of performance and then discuss different considerations when preparing athletes for championships. So two very, very simple aims, but hopefully throughout the course of the next hour and a half or so, you guys feel in a position whereby you've been able to take something away from these two areas. This is quite a simple slide I put together, but in simple terms, when we're talking about getting ready for a championships and when we're talking about successful performance at championships, for me, there are some similarities with that to just general successful performance, whether that's not at your championships, whether that's in a training session, whether that's in a low-key competition. The underpinnings of successful performance, there are some similarities between them two environments. So if you're personally or socially in a good place, in a good space, if you're mentally or psychologically feeling confident in what you're about to go and perform, if you've got some physical quality to your movement, if you're tactically aware of your execution points, and if you've got a good technical model behind you as well. So for me, if we can get an athlete in a position whereby they're personally, mentally, physically, tactically, and technically happy and advanced, then we're ultimately able to increase the chances of achieving successful performance, full stop. When we get to championships, though, there are other things that we need to consider. You have to have an extreme level of confidence in your race plan and an ability to execute it. So again, if we deal with athletes at YDL meetings, and then we have that athlete going to county championships and then a regional championships, potentially in English schools or in national championships. Again, the increase in confidence an athlete will need to have in them environments, in my opinion, increases as we move through them performance stages. When we get to a championships, we have these 5 different areas, these personal, these physical, etc. But we also have now an added layer of recovery between rounds. And that's something which we're going to explore later on in the presentation today. You might have travel involved. So again, if we've got athletes going to international championships, for example, then again, there's going to be travel. There might be time zone change with that. Even if we've got athletes competing domestically, again, English schools, back in my day, a lot of English schools were up in the northeast, up in Gateshead. And kind of originally, I live in Loughborough now, but originally I was from Kent, so the southeast. So again, that was a 6-7 hour coach journey up to Gateshead for English schools, 3 of my 5 years that I went to that championships. So again, it's not just you track around the corner, you've got to think about travel. The ability to adapt. And again, we'll talk a little bit about an athlete who I worked with a couple of years ago later on, and about how this athlete was able to adapt between rounds based on lane draw, based on how she was feeling in the race, etc., etc. So you've got to have a degree of adaptability. And increasingly, I think in this kind of COVID pandemic era that we're in, again, we saw it at the European Indoor Championships, people were having to give interviews in masks. People were having to go for multiple tests, lateral flow tests, before they could even step on the track at the European Indoor Championships last month. So again, a lot of our standard competition procedures this year are going to change. The times where we have 8 athletes in a 3 meter by 3 meter box, which we call a cool room, again, that is going to change probably this year. So again, athletes have got to be adaptable and open to new experiences and not let them new experiences affect them. Dealing with external pressures. So again, that might be at your county championships and your school know that you're competing at the county championships on the weekend and take a big interest in you. So again, it might be then external pressures from teachers at younger age groups. All the way through to, it might be the pressures of a 2 million TV audience on the BBC on a Sunday night. Okay, so again, we have these 5 areas that I am most interested in within my coaching, but actually what then goes around that at championships is very different to your local open meeting. I'm conscious today that throughout this presentation, I will talk a lot about international championships. But what I will try to do throughout this is to bring it back to domestic championships as well. For me, the lessons and the themes that I'm going to pick out within this presentation, a lot of them are as applicable to your county championships as they are your international championships, your world championships, your Olympic Games, your European championships, your Commonwealth Games, etc. Okay. Final bit, just from a coach perspective, and again, this is something which we're going to pick up on a little bit later as well, is knowing what to and what not to say. So championships can take place over 3, 4, 5 days. You might have an athlete who runs in the individual 400 and then goes on to the 4x4 relay. So again, they might compete across 5 days of that championships potentially. So again, throughout that period of time, what you say as a coach is going to have influence, either positive or negative, on your athlete. So again, having an understanding for what to say during a championships and what not to say during a championships, but also when to say it. I think these are 3 really, really crucial things to consider about your own coaching practice. A couple of years ago, Mike Leonard, who was a mentor for me on the National Coach Development Program, and one of the hosts of tonight's webinar, one of the things he said to me was about giving athletes space after they've ran around at a championships or at any level. And that's something which I really take on board, and I've taken on board a lot in my time since. I think quite often as coaches, we're quick to jump on our athletes after a race. And again, I was guilty of this a couple of years ago. And actually, sometimes athletes need space to process things, whether that's positive things to process, potentially areas for improvement to process. Again, it might be that you say something not on the day. It might be that something you have to say the day after, perhaps, as well. So again, knowing what to say, what not to say, and when to say it becomes even more important at the championships, when you might have 2, 3 consecutive days of competition. And the one thing about championships is that they are public. So again, we have to get our athletes' mind right. We have to get them technically on point. We have to get them physically in a great place. But all of this happens under the spotlight of big stadiums, potentially big packed out stadiums. Competing at a championships, whether that is your first English schools or your last English schools, whether that is your county championships, whether that is a domestic national or an international age group or senior championships. Championships happen in the public domain. And obviously, as we go through the performance pathway up to senior international level, that photo in the top left was from the 2018 Berlin European Championships. We're talking big stadiums and we're talking lots of capacity of people. So let alone the TV audience, which is watching from around the world as well. So as I said, successful performance championships, you have to get this part right. And then you have to prepare your athletes to go out on a stage and do execute the race plan that you want them to execute. And we have different athlete roadmaps to championships. So we have a roadmap to a championship whereby the athlete goes straight to the championships themselves. So this would be almost an entry point one, I'm calling this. So this would be your county or your regional championships, whereby you enter yourself into races. It might be club competitions. The one thing to always keep in mind is when I say championships, I mean your athlete's biggest race of the season. So for some athletes, as I said, that might be their county championships. And in that instance, for athletes whose biggest competition of the year is their counties, they would go through this process here. It would be entry point one. They would sign themselves up for their county championships. I don't believe there are any counties that will have a qualifying standard to get into the county championships. So again, they'll sign themselves up, and then when the athlete is at them championships, they're then going to go for the goals that they set themselves, whether that's time, position, execution, whatever it might be. So that's entry point one. What I'm going to discuss probably in more detail tonight is what I'm going to class as entry point two. So in entry point two, I'm going to talk about national and international championships. So again, national championships includes your age group nationals and your English schools. International championships, anything from a European juniors all the way through to Olympic Games. And when we have athletes trying to get to these championships, they will often need to run a qualifying standard. So it's not about just paying £10 and being admitted to the Olympic Games. If so, we'd all be doing it. So an athlete's got to run a qualifying standard. They've got to perform at a trial event. So whether that's their county school championships for the English schools, whether that is the age group championships, the England Athletics age groups for a European juniors, whether that is the Olympic trials like will be happening in Manchester this summer for the Olympic Games. Athletes will need to run a standard, and they will need to finish traditionally top two in their event at the trial event. At that point, if they do them two things, then they get the fun part. They go to the championships, and then they go for whatever they're trying to achieve at them championships. As I said, be it place, be it medals, be it times, whatever it might be. So we have two different athlete roadmaps, but as I said, regardless of whether your athletes are entry point one or entry point two, this presentation is about the championships. So the big race, that might be a BMC. That might be, I know a lot of endurance coaches will pick out certain BMC races to target because they get pacemates, et cetera, et cetera. So it could be your BMC, it could be your club competition, whatever it might be. Wherever your athlete's big race is, this is what this presentation is about tonight. But as I said, predominantly, we're going to talk about that through entry point number two. And one thing to consider, or well, I suppose one thing, multiple things to consider at this point is the answer to these questions for your specific athlete for entry point two. So if your athlete executes, actually, let me start a different way around. Let's start at the bottom. So running the qualifying standard. For each of these questions, I almost would produce a mental continuum for my athletes. And it's a continuum which I'm going to show you a little bit later for a couple of examples within athletes who I've coached currently and previously as well. So the qualifying standard, is the athlete on the edge of the limit of their limit physically for that standard? Or is the standard or the qualifying time that is set, is that comfortably within their limits? So that's a question that I will ask for my athlete at the beginning of the training year or whenever the standards come out. So I know standards for the age group championships this summer came out only, I think it was around 4 weeks ago or so now. But when them standards come out and when we've got a bit of an idea of what they will be, that's the first question I ask myself. If my athlete's aiming for English schools and they need to run 12.1 for the 80-meter hurdles, is that physically easily within their limit or is that right on the edge? Are they in a competitive event or not? So what I mean by that is that if you've got a standard for the Olympic Games of, say, 10:10 in the men's 100 meters, just picked an arbitrary number there. If you are the only athlete who has got that, that's obviously good for you. But actually, if there are 4 or 5 athletes who have got that standard, coming top 2 at the trials is not a guarantee. Okay, so again, think about whether or not the event your athlete is in is competitive or not, and how competitive it is. because that's going to influence that trial event, which is second on my almost kind of process towards getting to the championships itself. So are they physically capable of it? To what point? And are they in an event which is competitive or not? Finally, if an athlete or if said athlete executes a standard average race, do they go to the championships or not? So if they execute a standard race in their trial event, do they finish top 2 or do they not finish top 2? The answer to all of these questions is really important, because for me, it's important that you understand where your athlete sits on these continuums, as this is going to dictate how you approach your planning. It's going to dictate the training plan. It's going to dictate the competition plan, and it's going to dictate any psychological or nutrition interventions that you might have. So for example, I've got an athlete at the moment I've been working with now. This is my second year working with him, Irish athlete, 400 meter athlete, ran 46.1 seconds for the 400 meters last year. And Ireland are trying to qualify a mixed relay team for the Tokyo Olympic Games this summer. They currently don't have a team which sits in the top 16 teams in the world. They are hoping, they haven't yet, but they are hoping they get an invite for the World Relay Championships at the very, very beginning of May. And if they get that invite, each of them 4 athletes that competes in the mixed relay is going to have to be on point to qualify for that championships. They can't come in 98%. They need to come in at 99 or 100% each to qualify for the Olympic Games. So again, because of that, that's had a massive impact on when we've included certain nutritional interventions. Because for me, it's not about getting him ready for the Olympic Games, because he's not at the Olympic Games yet. Ireland haven't qualified an Olympic Games team yet. They are on the very physical edge of their limit as a team. It's not comfortable within their limits. They need to be on the edge of their limits. So for me, it's not like I would be doing this athlete a disservice if I start worrying about what's going on in June and July. I need him to be ready to roll come early May for his squad to have a chance to go to the Olympic Games this summer. We'll deal with the Olympic Games later if he gets there. But for me at this point in time, the biggest pressing issue is qualifying in the first place. Because as I said, because we're on the edge of the limit. Okay, so again, when you understand these things, where your athlete sits on these continuums, then I think you're in a better position to be able to plan how their training looks, how their competition plan looks, and if you've got any other interventions, how they look as well.